We have all seen the memes. You know, the ones like, I can't afford a house, but at least I can have an oat latte. But what if the rise in quote unquote little treat culture isn't necessarily the financial self-sabotage that it's been packaged up to be? Today, I want to talk about how we unpack this seemingly new phenomenon and wrap it around, you know, the cost of living crisis, which I think has reshaped how people are spending, how they're saving, how people are self-soothing when it comes to money. And, you know, the emotional response. I want to take us through the history books and see, is this really a new phenomenon? And is it the croissants, which we all, let's be honest, love and need in our life, that is keeping us from buying a house? Or instead, is it telling us, is it this the canary in the coal mine? Is this telling us that something bigger, more ominous, more dangerous is going on, that maybe we all need to do a little pause and go, okay, interesting. Maybe this is not just about little treat culture. Maybe this is a sign or a signal of something much bigger. And if it is, what do we have the power to control, and what can we actually do about it within our day-to-day life? So if you have a friend who you know likes to buy things because of, let's call it, little treat culture, today is the day to share this episode with them. Or if you need accountability and responsibility, maybe to, let's not say that you can't eat the quote-unquote cake or croissant, as it were, but maybe you need to be accountable to perhaps slightly reducing, tweaking your little luxury spends. Send this to the friend that you want to keep you responsible and on track to do whatever it is that you want to do moving forward with your money. This is a podcast for everyone that wants to learn how to make fierce and bold choices with their money. We'll talk about how to shape your money mindset, investing for your future, your spending habits, the good and the bad, plus how to achieve your financial goals, and most of all, how to be financially fierce. I am a financial educator, and I want to empower you to be more in control of your money and build the financial future that you want. I run the Greenhouse Money Growing Program, and you can find details of that in the podcast show notes. My name is Jessica Brady. It's time to get financially fierce. All right, so let's get into what the hell this is. In case you have not heard nor seen anything about this little treat culture, in case you have accidentally been doing it but maybe just not realized that you're doing it, what is it and why is it potentially so addictive? Now, people will say this is, you know, from TikTok or Instagram, and it's this signal of this collective cultural burnout, which is an interesting thing to ponder. And it's this idea of like emotional regulation and spending and consumerism, and how we, in a dystopian, pretty frustrating world that we have seen unfold definitely for the last few years, and I feel like every year we think it's going to get better, it sort of turns itself up a notch. You know, how are people using spending on little quote-unquote luxury items to get that feeling of maybe control and excitement and dopamine and happiness? And how should we feel about this? Why does it feel really good? What do we need to be aware of? And is it new? Now, let me just give you some research. If you're new here, hello and welcome to Financially Fierce. You will learn, as a numbers person, I like giving data, or insights, as that's probably a better word. Some Deloitte research showed that this is a thing. In case you're like, nah, this is not really a thing outside of like influencers. No, actually it is a thing. So they did some research that showed that consumers are much more likely to say that their quote unquote recent splurge purchase was something to do with food and drink. So, you know, we do talk about the avocado on toast. We talk about having the latte. And, you know, we've had generations gone by who have been like, well, if you just stopped those, you would be able to have all of your big life things. I'm going to give you some data that suggests that that's not necessarily true. But it is true that when people are leaning into these items of, dare I say, pleasure, it has been in the food or drink category. And some other research by McKinsey's showed similarly that groceries are like the newest, biggest splurge categories. We're all out here just thinking, oh, the world is a bit shite and I just think I need a little snack. What kind of little snack can I have to pep myself up, which kind of makes sense in a cost of living crisis where food and maybe going out for food has become something that many people have had to cut back on. It's like, well, if I'm not spending money going to the pub or going to a fine dining restaurant or, God forbid, any restaurant at all, then my ability to go and, justify or mentally math why it's okay to spend money on what is quote unquote a luxury snack checks out, because I'm not spending $100 on dinner, or I'm not just, going to the pub and blowing a whole heap of money. So I can understand the psychology behind it, but I also think it's fascinating that like the snack people are like, yeah, cool, we can see this as a big trend. And so they are now designing more, let's call them upmarket, individually sort of indulgence packaged snacks. And you might see this when you go to the grocery store, that you've now got more of these options which are trying to tempt you, and you're like, well, I mean, it seems crazy to spend $7 on a bag of chips, but these are fancy chips, and I'm staying at home tonight watching Netflix because I don't want to spend lots of money. I can have the damn chips. So this is sort of the Marie Antoinette of like, let them eat cake, but insert highly, luxurious, dare I say, snack items. Have you been guilty of your like luxe items being snacks? I probably think I have, and I would love to know if you have too. DM me, Jess Brady _ financial advice on Instagram. But let's sort of talk through what this sort of means. So I think, we've gone through a really hard few years being literally locked in, which has meant that people were forced to pretty much overnight rapidly change their spending behaviour. And in a lot of ways, it improved savings. We also know that it increased house prices considerably. There was some big drop in markets, but then there was also some really fast return to markets and huge market growth sort of from there on in. But I think, we then saw really large inflation numbers against wage increases, which I'm going to come to in a minute. And so people have been, over the last few years, really dynamically changing how they spend money. And because things that were once easy or attainable were no longer, going on holidays, et cetera, people have had to redefine what spending money on things that make them happy in that moment look like. So I want to go through sort of the reality of this and a bit more around this kind of cost of living versus luxury spend. And like, we are seeing it in sort of this funny way. I think they're called Labubu's. I certainly had never heard of them until only a few weeks ago. But like, we've taken that and that idea and almost, particularly for like me, who I think I'm called like a late stage millennial, or an early stage millennial, whatever the oldest millennial is, I'm one of those. And so it's easy to look at another generation and be like, oh, they're just spending money on stupid, useless things. Sorry if you have one, and that's not necessarily my take. And I think that we are so fast to forget how we too, if you're in my age group, were, being told that our Avo on toast was the reason that we can't have all of these nice things. And I think that is, an interesting observation, that we were once told something and we were like, this is so not true. And yet I feel like my age group is doing the same thing to the next generation of, let's call them young adults, who are choosing to spend their money on areas or categories that we may not understand. But I wouldn't say that this is a relatively new phenomenon. I just think what we are choosing to really focus in on in terms of, let's call it a magnifying glass, because that's a nicer way to say than like an attack, is something to ponder and consider. So let's go through this in a bit more detail. I think if we look at wages versus inflation, it's been an interesting few years. So the ABS isn't necessarily the most up to the minute with their info. And so I don't have anything from like the end of June or the end of the financial year to give you. But I do have this really cool graph from the ABS, which is like got all of these squiggles and colours, which if you didn't understand what you were looking at, looks like a very odd abstract piece of art. But actually the colours are how much of a pay rise people have been given over the last, it goes back to 2009. And so, did you get a wage cut? Did you get an increase of 0 to 2%, 2% to 3%, 3% to 4%, 4% to 6%, 6%+. And if you look at the last couple of years, firstly, a lot of people over the last couple of years have actually received a pay cut. And so if we look at it from March 2025, 3.7% of people got a pay cut. The 0 to 2% band. So you've got to really think about this versus inflation. So we've had really high inflationary periods, which have now come back and normalized back down. The week that I'm recording this podcast, we saw inflation data come out, which for the end of the June quarter, I think takes the annualized inflation to 2.1% for the last 12 months. That's the lowest it's been, I think, since 2021. So we've had this situation where for a lot of people, their wages haven't been growing to even keep up with inflation. And so their pockets have been, pressured, if you will, because their money is not stretching far enough. So a large percentage of people have been getting 0 to 2% wage increases. So it's about 15% of people. So again, if you had an inflationary environment where 2% wasn't even keeping up with inflation, in real dollar terms, your money is going fewer miles. And so you're going to have to cut back. What I have noticed, particularly over the last couple of quarters, so let's call it 2025 to March, because that's when this data is from, is that 17% of people have got between a 2 to 3% pay rise. So nearly 20% of the population is at least now getting some level of inflationary buffer. Your money's not necessarily going any further, but at least it's not in real dollar terms going backwards. But if you look at the biggest category of wage growth in March 2025, it's actually 3 to 4%. Nearly 40% of people, so 37% of people have had wage growth, and we call this the wage price index, the WPI, which you might have heard of. 37% of people have got a wage increase of 3 to 4%. So you're getting at least inflation and maybe a tiny bit more on top of that to be able to do stuff with. And I think the reason why so many people have gotten 3 to 4% is if you look at historically, over the last couple of years, you'll see not many people got 3 to 4%. In fact, back in March 2024, so only 12 months earlier, it was half that amount. It was only 20% of people that got 3 to 4%. So I think there is a lot of almost catch up from organizations where they didn't give pay rises that kept up with inflation. People were probably like, hey, you didn't give me enough of a pay increase. I'd really like to pitch to get a bigger pay increase, please. And so people have been squeezed for the last few years. If you think about an environment where, what did we have, like nearly 7%, or maybe more than 7% inflation, like very few people were given wage increases that kept up with inflation over the last few years. So what I'm saying overarchingly is wages versus inflation has been a tough road. And so again, if you are seeing an environment where your costs at every angle are being squeezed and your wages are not going as far, then you are going to have to drastically change how you spend. And you are probably going to do less holidays, less big ticket items. You are going to look for little moments where you can spend little amounts of money, seemingly insignificant amounts of money, that do bring you this daily joy. So I think, this whole idea that this is a new craze or that this is something that is a particular generation, it's not. And I'll give you some more data that proves that. But I think it also tells this historical story of the fact that for the last several years at least, we've had wage growth to inflation be really challenging. And then we're not even going to get into it right now, but we will in a moment, this whole house price conundrum where people are feeling so frustrated and they're like, well, what's the fucking point? If I'm being really frank with you, I could save my ass off. I could never have any joy, any moments of, pleasure ever again from a spending perspective. And would it even matter in the long run? Hopefully by the end of this episode, I'll make you feel a little bit less like that if that's how you're feeling at the moment. But I think observationally, it is no surprise that we've entered this sort of little treats culture and that people are sharing insights around that because people are frustrated and looking for daily moments of joy in a world that, from a lot of angles, has been particularly tough. So I want to just really dispel the myth that this is sort of a new thing. And I will come to house prices and things like that at the moment. But, sometimes the question that I think about when we talk about spending is this, how do I put this? Is this because our priorities are completely different? Is this because we are, reckless and emotional and because we are being influenced by social media who is constantly bombarding us and telling us, A, we're not enough and that B, they have the perfect solution and we should just quickly buy now? Or is this actually just a response to an environment that's been particularly shite for people? I mean, there's research that came out a little while ago that said that the next generation of Australians are going to be economically going backwards compared to generations before them. And so, you grapple that insight against the insight, which also says that we're on the verge of, and it's beginning, the largest intergenerational wealth transfer ever. You seemingly have two very different pieces of information being smashed up against each other. In one sort of sense or one lens, we're saying there are a lot of people who are economically not going to have the same opportunity as their parents or their grandparents. And simultaneously, what we're saying is there are a lot of people who are going to inherit a shitload of money. And we're already seeing this play out, and we're seeing the middle class or the middle belt of Australia being squeezed. And we're going to have less and less people in that middle belt. And actually what we're going to see a rise of is the affluent people becoming more affluent. And obviously, that is why I'm here, because I'm like, well, I'm not okay with the middle belt of Australia being squeezed out. I'm not okay with the idea that you will not have financial stability and security. And I'm here to teach you ways to be able to do what you can to counteract that. But I think from a macroeconomic perspective, we also need to look at what the hell is going on and the fact that this is really alarming and troubling, because we've always been seen as the land of fair go. And I think it's going to become the land of I haven't quite figured out a pitch for what the land of is going to be, but I don't think it is going to be fair. I don't think fair is the word. I think we need to find a new word. If you've got a word that you think is going to fit into that, can you share it with me? And I'd be interested to see if I agree and if we can sort of – I don't want to make it the new tagline though. We want it to be fair, but that's not what's happening. So I do think we do have a different lens. A lot of younger people are – focusing on different priorities. We did see our parents potentially slog their way through life, working potentially for the same employer, living in the same house, focusing on paying off their debt, not really doing a lot of experiential spending. And I think a lot of millennials certainly were like, yeah, no, that's not how we want to live. And so when we started in our careers, which is for me nearly 20 years ago in finance, how scary is that? The priorities shifted in terms of how we think about our careers and not staying in one forever, or, happily waiting and renting, which, certainly my parents' generation was like, it's dead money. You can agree or disagree, but, happily trading that off for the ability to go on holidays or do different things. So, is this a value shift? Is this that we've moved away from, owning assets and doing the life milestones to being more experience driven? And actually, I think we're now coming back to that. I saw some research a little while ago saying that the younger generations are actually the most stressed about financial stability and security. They can probably see the writing on the wall that I've just left uni and I have a massive HECS debt and I now share with 15 people in a share house and we're spending all of our money just to pay for a room that's about to crumble and our landlord won't fix anything and we still get, rent rises, and if I want to go and do anything, it's going to be a lot of hard financial work. And so I can understand why they are coming into a world where they are watching things increase substantially from a cost perspective and be like, I'll just buy a latte. Fine. Who cares? And I hate that we distill it down to that because I think it really dumbs us down. I think it does, but I actually think it speaks to the fact that there are so many challenges and people can feel so powerless. I actually think it speaks to control. And it speaks to this deep desire to want to be able to use money to fund a lifestyle that people want. Because ultimately, that's why a lot of people invest, because they want to be able to have freedom. They want to be able to do what they want when they want. And if you know or you have an idea that that is never going to happen, you can really convince yourself that it's not worth trying and that I don't actually need or want to put money towards investments because that robs me of the tiny opportunity to do something fun here and now. So yeah, I think it's actually a massive problem. When I come back from the break, I want to talk about why this is not a new idea, why history will tell and prove to you that this is slightly different in terms of how we're spending our money, but something that's been around and categorized and well historically researched for a long period of time. But I think most importantly, what are the bigger considerations when it comes to house prices? And what the hell do we actually do about this? Should we do anything about it? I'll tell you my thoughts after the break.
If you're after personal financial advice, don't get it from a podcast. If you would like help based on your own personal situation, head over to moneypodcast.com.au, click Get Help, and we'd be happy to introduce you to one of our trusted professionals. Our panel of vetted financial advisors and mortgage brokers work with people all over Australia so they can connect with you wherever you are. That's moneypodcast.com.au and click Get Help.
All right, let's put it out there. This little treat culture is not new. We have a new coin or term for it. The little lux items, little treat culture, whatever you want to call it. Sure. Maybe that is new. But this is a concept of having money spent in ways that are counterintuitive, frankly, to most people's financial goals is not new. In fact, it can be seen as a recessionary indicator. Not necessarily saying that we're going into recession. I'm not saying at all that we're going into recession, but it is an interesting fact. So let me give you some data. There is something called the lipstick index, which you may or may not have heard about. Now, this was coined by Estee Lauder's, I don't know who he is, but he's got Lauder as his surname, Leonard Lauder. Love that alliteration. Clearly someone in the Lauder family, so thus very wealthy, no doubt. Who better to talk about scarcity and recession and spending than someone who is very wealthy? But let me tell you what it's about. The lipstick index is basically this idea that the sales of affordable luxuries, a la a lipstick, will rise in economic downturns. So we have seen this where spending behaviour changes in previous economic downturns, or, even if it's not a downturn in a share market, it could be, pressures and challenges from a fiscal sense, a financial sense, that's what that means. And so we see this when there are financial headwinds in history. So this is not new. What we are spending on is arguably slightly different, given that we just talked about the increase of Lux snacks. But what we have seen over and over again during periods of uncertainty, financial instability, potentially recession periods, is this idea that people want to treat themselves with smaller luxury items. Historically, it has been beauty items to add, quote unquote, little joy into everyday lives. I love this idea that people in sort of post-war era were like, well, I can't afford brand new items. I can't afford new dresses, but if I buy a different lipstick color, if I've got 3 or 4 lipstick colors, it'll surely change the whole look and feel, and it'll be a brand new outfit. And it's bright and it's, exciting, and it's this way to add character to someone and make them look put together at a time where they may not feel like they can do that in other ways. I find that really interesting. So let me give you some history, because I am a history nerd. Don't worry, there's not much. If you're not into history, skip across maybe a minute. But I think this is quite interesting to observe or think about. Sometimes we like to think we're new and clever. Not always. Lipstick sales increased 25% during the Great Depression. The Great Depression, so what's that, in the 1930s, I think. That's a pretty hefty increase. So again, history tells us that's true. Closer to our time period, lipstick sales rose 11% after 9/11. After the GFC, so 2008, researchers found a significant increase in buying of cosmetics among younger women. Specifically, they called out women that were 18 to 40 years old. Then in 2020, a different research team did some exploratory research on whether lipstick purchases in a recession might be to try to, get this, increase their attractiveness to try to find a mate. I am quoting from the research. Or was it to boost their employment prospects? Or was it actually that they just want cheaper treats or luxe items than clothes? I love this idea that this research team was like, the world is ending potentially in 2020. We are all being locked inside. We should do some research to see if people are buying lipstick to find a mate, to find a job, or to find a way to spend in a cheaper way than before. And I think if you consider that from an evolutionary perspective, it's kind of a fair thought, right? Because if you feel like the world's crumbling, maybe you do want to find someone to crumble with, or maybe because there were considerable job losses, they wanted to do what they can to look presentable. We love to think that we live in a world where presentation doesn't matter, but annoyingly research suggests that it does? Or is it just that we want to have moments of joy? And frankly, we were all on our screen, like we could have been in our pajamas. I think most of us were in our pajamas for a lot, if not all of 2020. And so just shoving on some lipstick at the very moment before you go on a Zoom call or an online call might have just been the way to distract or look put together when you were in your jammies. Anyway, the thorough research, no doubt, found out that actually it wasn't, albeit their inquisitiveness around why people were wanting to do this, it wasn't actually done because people wanted to find a new mate or to become or stay employed. It actually really truly was because people wanted to substitute spending on bigger items, a la clothes, which makes sense if you're not going out. You probably don't want or need new clothes, but you might want to look good for your online meetings. So they have found this correlation that this increase in cosmetics, specifically lipstick, which has been studied for now a long time, can all hark back to this idea that we are just looking for ways to create more pleasure from spending in a more fiscally responsible kind of way. I love this because if you think about it, it's really clever because if you buy a new item of clothing, there's only so many times and places you can you can wear it before people start cottoning on like they do with me. Shit, she wears that all the damn time, which I do. But I think with lipstick, you can wear it all the time and it can become like your signature go-to. Anyway, I'm going down a strange historical rabbit hole, but I find it fascinating. And in the UK right now, what we are seeing is that British consumers, so humans, I love that we just call people who are buying things consumers instead of just people, they are buying quote unquote affordable luxury items like lipstick still and beauty more broadly. And get this, they found that prestige lip products, I don't know what constitutes a prestige lip product over a normal lip product. Anyway, the sales of those have gone up 16%, up to £80.4 million in the first half of 2025. So this idea that, there are financial headwinds is not just in Australia. We are seeing this globally. And as I said, this has been something that we have seen in a lot of periods of economic instability in the past. So let's now talk about how this interplays with property, because I think that is one of the biggest challenges. Yes, we've seen wage prices not increase in line with inflation, and that can frustrate people because they have to change their spending, reduce maybe going out as much, etc. But then I also think, the bigger picture and the things that people were perhaps quite motivated to save for in the past has also added an extra layer of complexity here, because then people are watching house prices run away from them. And there is this element of like, what is the point when I can just have the thing right now and it gives me a moment of pleasure? This is, as I'm recording this is quite new data. It only came out last week. So this is the Cotality Home Value Index, House Value Index, Home Value Index. Anyway, we call it the HVI from July 2025. Strap yourself in if you are not yet in the housing market. And this is such a double-edged sword because people who are in the property market love to see data like this, and people who are on the outside just feel further and further behind the fence. So national median house prices were up again in July by 0.6%. If you think about the fact that we already have some of the highest house-to-income multipliers in the world, just over 0.5% doesn't sound like a huge amount. But when it's like that every month and we're starting from already a quite high base, it becomes really challenging. So the national median value of a property today is now $844,000. In Sydney, it is 100,000. No, Jess. Not unless you have a time machine. It is 1.228 as the median value. So if you live in a capital city, actually, if you live in Australia, anywhere in Australia, you look at these house prices and they are becoming further and further out of reach. Shout out to Darwin, which has the lowest median value. They've had an interesting and rocky ride, but I think they've come back quite strongly over the last couple of months. You can buy, apparently, a median value dwelling for just under $550,000. $549,371 is the median value house price in Darwin. Is it that we are all going to need to relocate to the NT to buy affordable property. The next most affordable property by median value is Hobart, $673,000. So I think this is the point in time where you are considering, am I moving to boiling hot or freezing cold? Pick your poison, pick your temperature poison if you are wanting to go somewhere where you may have a shot of getting in at a median value. And I know that I'm making that as like a joke, but I also think that for more and more people, honestly, they are going to have to make some pretty considerable trade-offs if they are wanting to get into the property market. And look, clearly these are medians and there are lots and lots of things to consider in between that. But talking about this treat culture and the fact that a lot of people do want a property. And I think a lot of people need a property. If we look at retirement data, it's one of the biggest indicators of whether you will end your life in poverty or not is A, whether you own a home that you live in, and B, whether that debt is paid off by the time you retire or not. So like we can talk about this idea that maybe a lot of younger people don't want a property and be shackled by the burdens of a mortgage. But I think we also need to call out that at some point people's priorities do tend to shift and that we do need some level of financial stability and security, be it through investing elsewhere or through home ownership, because otherwise you are going to end up in a very potentially precarious position, or you're going to need a shed load of wealth in those investment portfolios to be buffered from rent increases. And so, look, I am not trying to bring the mood down. I can understand absolutely why all of these things have culminated to a culture where we do kind of just think, well, what's the point? I just want the thing here and now, and I'm going to have it. And it's considered recklessness, and I don't think it is. I think we have to reframe that. So, treat culture, I don't think it's financial recklessness. I think it is a response and a retaliation to the world around us, and I think it is this quest for control and joy, and we are allowed to use money to have fun. Let's just put that out there for a moment. You are allowed to use money to have a great time. The problem is obviously doing that at the expense of future you. And that always can become a little bit tricky of figuring out what is enough to have fun and feel good right now, but not completely sabotage the remainder of your life. How do we find this balance between joy here and now and also being, an adult and figuring out, right, well, I can't just spend recklessly from here on in. And I do really need to think about future me. And I don't want to end up in poverty. Like the amount of women that come to me and do my programs and say, I have just seen these stats where so many older women are retiring in poverty and I don't want that. Like I think there is this underlying fear that like that is potentially something that more and more people are going to have to face. And I want to do something now about that. And I think this idea that, younger people live in this blissful, ignorant state of not recognizing that is certainly not my experience. I think a lot of people of all age categories are actually terrified about that. And so whilst they may not have connected the dots with their spending, it does create an underlying simmering amount of fear in their brains. And I'm here to tell you, we have to find a beautiful middle ground. You are allowed to buy some luxe treats. I am saying yes to the croissant for you if you want it, or insert your, spending pleasure here. But I am also here to say, let's figure out a way that we can set up a cash flow plan for you so that it is not one or the other. We don't want lifestyle creep to mean that as you do get a pay rise, as you do change your spending behavior, it is being absorbed in a different category that is not helping you with your future goals. So I hate this idea of people saying that they invest in something that is not an investment. If you are investing in something, it needs to grow or give you dividends. So I would say there are some things that you can invest in. If you are investing in your education or learning about something that is going to help you grow either in your career or as a human, or to be able to learn how to, make more money or invest your money, whatever. Yeah, sure. I actually think that is an investment in you. But investing in a cardigan is not an investment. Like, let's be clear, that's not an investment. That's a cost. And we won't even talk about my strong thoughts on this whole bullshit of girl math because there isn't enough time today. So I think what we need to do is, instead of saying like, I deserve this or I've worked so hard or whatever the language is that we're trying to use to justify this behavior, I think instead what we have to say here is like, you can honor your emotional need for joy in life right now and using some level of money to have that without undermining your long-term goals. Like, I want to give you I don't want to say permission because you're an adult and you can do whatever the hell you want with your money, but I want you to take back control here. And rather than being like, I deserve this spend, which is, I think, a little bit like a toddler standing in the grocery store being like, but I really want it, before they like melt into the floor and start screaming. And instead saying like, yeah, cool. Of course I can have both of these things. And of course I can put a framework in place. I'm a capable human. I'm going to figure this out so that I'm not doing one over the other. And I do find people tend to do one over the other. And very few people manage that middle ground quite well before they come and work with me, certainly, because, I also want to point out here, again, it's this holding space for two completely different things at the same time, which is hard, is that I don't know if you're going to live for a long time. I do not know that, and you do not know that. That's a scary thought to think about. Simultaneously, we could live for a really long time when it comes to medical technologies are always advancing. And so there is a risk that you could die tomorrow. And so if you've just been so fiscally responsible and you've just spent money on nothing that gives you pleasure and then boom, you drop dead, I think that's sad. It is sad. It's not I think that's sad. That is sad. And that is, unfortunately, something that we do see a little bit, where people have been squirreling money away for a quote-unquote retirement that they don't get. But also, you could live for a really long time. And I don't want you to run out of money. So we can definitely do some things about this. And we can hold space for the idea that both of those things could be true. And both of those things need to be planned for. So to wrap up today, which has become a lot longer accidentally, as per usual, on our little treats deep dive, what can we do? You're entitled to joy money. I love this idea of joy money. I see joy as like my personal spending sort of like supervisor. She's got a job. Joy has to make sure that if I'm going to spend my money on the here and now, I get maximum ROI, maximum return. And that's a happiness metric, not an investment metric. And so I need to make sure that I'm not just doing spending in the here and now that actually isn't value aligned, that isn't going to give me good levels of joy or lasting levels of joy. But we want it to be structured. We want it to be intentional. And we want to have, I think, a bank account just for that, so that you have an allocation. I do it weekly. And I can just choose what I'd like to bring joy into my life through spending with for that week. And if I don't have like this week, I've spent almost no money on joy. And that's okay. But it just means that I've got more money banked up for if and when I want to have more joy spend. And if I don't use it, I just end up rewriting it into a different account. I think we also need to consider, how do we reframe progress and financial progress specifically, goal progress specifically, when we do have these big goals that do potentially start feeling like they are further and further out of reach? What is the strategy? House prices are not likely to go down anytime soon. I'm really sorry to be the bearer of bad news, particularly given house price data that we've just talked about, given the fact that inflation is within bandwidth, given that the RBA in July did not reduce interest rates. We are likely to see interest rates go down again. That is likely to increase borrowing capacity. That means more people are going to be in the ring to buy a property. Supply is still really tight in Australia. I just think we need to be really honest about the fact that all of the data is suggesting that house prices are not going down anytime soon. Unless something really big and catastrophic happens, I just can't see that happening. That's my crystal ball take. And if you're not in the property market, I really hope I'm wrong for you. But rather than just giving up, I think honestly, we need to go repivot, recalibrate, repivot, pivot. I think pivot is just a standalone, not a repivot. Maybe what I thought was my property goal needs to be really critically analysed and reimagined. Reimagined, let's say that instead of pivoting. Rather than just sitting on the sidelines watching this thing rise and you getting further and further frustrated and off to buy Labubus or whatever the hell they're called, maybe it's rent vesting. Maybe it is that you're moving interstate. Maybe it's that you're going to make a pretty drastic call. Maybe it's you're going to buy with your bestie or buy with your sibling in the first home buyer stuff. Maybe rather than buying and giving up on yourself and buying those small things, it's about sitting down and having a really hard, important, uncomfortable conversation with yourself about whether this big goal is something you still want to focus on? And what does progress look like? And what is the likely world that you are going to encounter, a la house prices that are going up? What is that going to mean for your goal? And if you know that it's one that is potentially not attainable, then I want you to have that really uncomfortable conversation with yourself and figure out what is your next step. And progress is so important. I think also, this idea of building in mini wins, building in mini challenges. I love doing no spend days. If you need to do a 30-day no buy month, which is where you don't buy anything other than essential items, just to see where you are potentially recklessly spending. Because whilst I am saying you're allowed to have joy money, I also know that there's a huge amount of people that take my inch and run a mile in terms of, she said I could spend, I am going to spend. And so if you need to do a whole month, it'll be hard, but also A, helps you realize you're wildly capable, and B, you probably actually aren't any different. You just probably have more money. You're still the same you, just with less stuff, more money in the bank. And your brain has probably done some good new neural rewiring, which is what we need to do if we've been spending too much for too long. And we can also hold space for normalizing the idea that it is okay to be frustrated with what's happened over the last several years. It is okay to feel like it's unfair that, it's harder than it has been. My parents, my dad was a bus driver. My mum was a nurse. In today's standards, honestly, I was talking about this the other day. If my parents had to try to have 3 kids, my mum did a master's while she had 3 kids. How? I genuinely do not know. While she worked full-time as a nurse and my dad was a bus driver. So she would have had HECS debt, 3 kids to feed, and they would have been on, I wouldn't say great incomes. We certainly didn't grow up with a huge amount of money, but I really think, I don't even know if they would be able to pay rent and keep us fed and clothed in today's environment. So it is fair to look at your parents and think, wow, they were able to do quite a bit on potentially quite a normal income. I might even have a better income than them, and I still feel like I'm challenged. It is okay to feel frustrated by that. But what I don't want you to do is have that anger swallow you whole. I want you to find some agency to be angry at the system, but not give up on yourself and not feel like it is too much and too burdensome and too hard. There is always another way. That is the great thing with money, and can be so frustrating because people are like, teach me the way. And I'm like, there are so many ways that you can build wealth. You get to decide. And so you need to remember that in those hard moments. Doing nothing is often the worst thing that you can do. So where are you spending money on little luxes right now? Is it too much? Is it just right? Are we Goldilocks? Are we perfect? Do we have a system where we can give ourselves an amount of money where we feel really happy about that spend and it does bring joy? And we have got a good solid plan for investing our money, paying off debt, building savings, insert your financial goal here so that we've got that beautiful balance right. It is okay to be angry at the system. It is not okay to give up on yourself in that process. I would love so much, because I am so nosy. I'm so nosy. I'd love to know, what are your luxe spends right now? Are you buying lipsticks? Are you buying beauty products? Are you buying snacks? Luxe individually packaged snacks, as I believe they were called. Hit me up, Jess Brady _ financial advice. I would love to know where your luxe spends are coming in at in terms of too much, just right, too little, and what you're going to do about them, and specifically what you're spending your money on. Go and spend some time repivoting your plan this week. Give yourself one goal where you can track the progress of that, even if it's over the next 30 days, a couple of little milestones that you can work towards to build some momentum to take you to the next level. Rome was not built in a day. It wasn't. And your financial journey is going to look quite similar. So set a target, set a couple of milestones, put them somewhere where you can see them often, be it your screensaver on your phone, in your shower, Post-it note on your mirror, whatever, so that you can every day have that reminder of what you're working towards and why it is all worth it in the end. I hope today has been helpful. Send this to someone who might need to, have a history lesson, but also to perhaps get, recalibrated with their spending and feel like they don't need to have that shame and guilt with spending, because they can find a way that they can do it responsibly. Let's normalize that, hey? That is all from me. Go now. Go and be financially fierce. Bye.
We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Any advice is general financial advice only, which does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Because of that, you should consider if the advice is appropriate to you and your needs before acting on the information. If you do choose to buy a financial product, read the Product Disclosure Statement, PDS, and Target Market Determination, TMD, and obtain appropriate financial advice tailored to your needs. Jessica Brady is an Authorised Representative of Paragem Pty Ltd, Authorised Representative Number 1259972, AFSL 297276, ABN 16108571875, Corporate Authorised Representative Number 1305567.